Hello there.
Listen to the album.
Hi. Uh, Interesting format. Never done this before, but hello. My name is Dodo, also known as Letter 45 or Dodo TV, as I was formerly known on my now defunct YouTube channel, my other channel, on which I used to post back in 2021 and 2022. But we do not talk about that. Not that I'm ashamed of it, but doesn't really matter anymore. So why am I making this video? Because pretty soon we're going to be having the 1 year anniversary of the album Epitaph, which I shall be talking about today. I wanted to sort of dissect the album a little bit more, given that the rollout for it was a bit cryptic, so to speak. I didn't really explain too much, not that I really had the occasion either, you know. It didn't even have that big of an impact, so to speak. I'm not trying to sound full of myself in any way. It's just more that I'm aware that nobody really knows me on my current level at which I'm releasing music. And so I wasn't expecting much of a reaction when I released Epitaph. Also, you might recognize the furniture from my Every Breath You Take music video, my cover, which you can find on my YouTube channel. You can also find on my YouTube channel the entirety of Epitaph, which you can also find on streaming, except Spotify. Why I'm not on Spotify, I'll leave it up to you to discover for yourself, but I'm going to name 3 major reasons. AI artists, investments in AI military technology, and the low payouts for artists in general. So first of all, I'd like to talk about the release date of Epitaph. Why did I call it Epitaph in the first place? So the album is really an ode to childhood. The album was released on the 15th of April, which is a date which holds a personal meaning to me. But it is also in direct proximity to my birthday, which is coming actually pretty soon, in like 2 weeks or so, when I'm going to be turning 19 years old. So last year I turned 18. What does 18 mean? I'm turning into a legal adult. And so Epitaph is an album which sort of bookends my childhood, so to speak. That's why I named it Epitaph, as my childhood came to a close. And so on its grave, so to speak, I left this album as the Epitaph. I know, philosophical, so to speak, very deep meaning. Ooh. The album was recorded in my house where I grew up, in a small village, which is right next to a small town here in Romania. In case you didn't know, I'm Romanian, and my town of origin is in the middle of nowhere, even though it is the capital, the municipality of the county in which it is in. And yet it is very small in its size, population, and anything else. Really, there's nothing happening there. It's like the Oklahoma City of Romania, in the middle of nowhere. Nobody talks about it ever. As for the equipment I used, the entire album is recorded on a mobile phone. Everything from the vocals to my electric bass, which the way I recorded the electric bass was that I put the phone right in front of the amp so that I got the proper sound out of it. And for the guitar, I don't even own an electric guitar. I have a classical guitar at home, and what I did was put the phone right up to the strings and record every bit of my guitar. And from my phone on my voice recorder, I then imported it into FL Studio, which is the DAW that I use and have been using since 2021. This microphone, I bought it like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and what it is connected to, an audio interface, as you'd expect, which I also bought a few months ago. And hopefully this will allow me to have a better audio quality in my future recordings. And I'm sure that my voice here sounds much better than on my album. And so this is an explanation for why the sound quality is rather questionable on that album. Regardless, this is a concept album. As I mentioned previously, it is about childhood. The progression of the tracks on the album, the track list, starts from my oldest memories all the way up to me turning 18 years old and grappling with the idea of finally turning into an adult. Which brings me to the lyrical content of the album. I'd say that my biggest influence for my lyrics is a rather famous Romanian poet named George Bacovia, who was the biggest or most relevant poet in the symbolist movement of Romanian poetry, whose activity started in 1916 with his debut book featuring his poems, and I'm pretty sure he kept publishing poems all the way up to his death in 1957. Why am I most inspired by this specific poet? I first came into contact with him because of school. Here in Romania, high school ends with 3 finals exams, one of which is Romanian literature specifically. And to prepare for this exam, you need to read a couple books which are historically relevant, so to speak. I mean, some of them are really boring, others are actually really good, and some poems as well. And the reason why we need to read all of this is because the final subject of the exam revolves around an essay which we need to write of at least 400 words, in which we analyze one of these works. Now, the thing is that we don't know what specific work we need to analyze, and so we have to prepare for these exams with like 15 of these books and poems. Regardless, as I said, some of the books are actually really good, and the same applies for the poems, of which my favorite was called Lead by Bacovia. And what I like most about Bacovia is, given that he was a symbolist poet, he left a lot of his poems up to interpretation, something that I definitely appreciate in any sort of art form. And I sort of follow this same philosophy with my own lyrics. And of course, if you read my lyrics, some of them are very straightforward about what I'm talking about, but I also leave some more cryptic meanings in them, and I'd like to see if anyone wants to analyze them in any way, but as I said, I don't expect that. Anyway, what I'm going to do in this video is, as I previously stated, I'm going to be taking every track off of the album and talking about my creative process and what inspired me to record each of them. So, without further ado, let's begin. So the first track on the album is a field recording called Gugustuk, which is the Romanian word for the European collared dove. It has a very specific sort of chirp, so to call it, more of a coo, which you can hear on said track. And why did I choose this specific bird? Because I've always felt this sort of attraction to the sound that this bird makes. It's very calming, so to speak. But why it's relevant is because that is probably the oldest sound I can remember. Because I remember I was on a walk with my grandmother, and I heard this bird singing. And that's probably the oldest sound I can remember. Probably not necessarily the oldest memory, but then again, that is a very complicated topic, because I'm sure that we all have this sort of oldest memory debate within our heads. Like, oh, this is the oldest memory. No, this is the oldest memory I have. Regardless, that is the meaning behind this recording. All right, next we have the track For Teddy. Who is Teddy? Is the teddy bear featured on the album cover, who I have right here. I know it's Winnie the Pooh, but I've always called him Teddy. Yeah, I know, very creative. And why Teddy is relevant is because I've always had him by my side since I was 1 year old, I think. Maybe 1 or 2 years old. And I've had him with me ever since. I've slept with Teddy by my side almost every night ever since. And I still do to this day. I still have him in my bed, right beside me. And I always fall asleep with him in my arms. And so, obviously, I have a very deep emotional connection to this plush toy. Because even when I don't have him with me, because maybe I had a 1 or 2 day trip somewhere, and I saw no reason in bringing Teddy with me, I always fell asleep with my arms, like this, as if I had Teddy by my side. And so this song is dedicated to Teddy right here. And obviously it's an ambient track because I tried to replicate this sleepy atmosphere, so to speak, which fits the theme of falling asleep with your teddy bear. Next, we have the first track with actual vocals on it, The Beach. Some of my oldest memories are on the beach with my family. For many, many years, in fact, we've had yearly family trips to the beach, whether it was here in Romania or abroad. This sort of yearly repetition also lends well with the repetitive nature of the main riff featured on the song. This, in fact, is also one of the oldest songs written for the album. Not necessarily the lyrics, but the riff itself actually dates back to 2022. The oldest track on this album is actually from 2021, if you believe me. One noteworthy thing about this track is the bridge, in which I repeat the fact that I hate sand. God, I really hate it when the sand sticks to my skin. When I walk out of the water, it always sticks to my feet, or even gets inside my swimsuit. And whenever I get to my hotel or wherever I'm staying, I have to wash it off in the shower because it keeps sticking to me, and I don't want to bring the sand into my bed. I know this is very nitpicky of me, but I really do not like it when the sand sticks to my skin. Either way, this track is, in general, about the beach and everything that's happening there. Sort of every single thing you see on the beach, especially here in Romania. It's usually a very chaotic environment. Sure, you could say it's a pretty sight, but whenever you go to the beach here in Romania, it usually has a very chaotic atmosphere, at least in my opinion. Moving on, we have the track Pillow, which also dates back to 2022. And it actually came to be because of a jam session. I had this friend who I still occasionally talk to, and I will come back to this friend on a later track. I will talk about him, but keep this in mind for the time being. And we had this sort of idea of making a band. I invited him to my house, where we tried making a sort of slowcore inspired track. It didn't turn out that well, but an attempt was made. What I do remember is that I was playing a bass line underneath him, just sort of fiddling around on his guitar, and it was the chord progression featured on that track. Even the way the bass sort of moves underneath the guitar chords is inspired by the way he programmed the drums during that original jam session. So you could say that he influenced this specific track. You may have noticed by now that every single track up until now is vastly different to one another, and this is sort of a theme on this album, and you'll probably notice it from this point onward on a lot of my future releases, because I don't want to stick to a specific sound, at least under the Dodo name. And now that I say that, I should also mention why my name is Dodo, why I call myself Dodo. It's in fact a nickname which I've had since I was 7 years old. And why I have this nickname is because of my younger sister, who, when she was a baby, found it very difficult to say Tudor or Tudor, which is my real name. And so she resorted to saying Dodo, and it sort of just stuck like that. Most people I know these days call me Dodo, usually if we've known each other for a little while and we get to know each other a little better, friendship sort of forms, and you just call me Dodo. And I usually introduce myself as either Tudor or Dodo. I also mentioned that my younger sister used to say Dodo because it was easier for her. It turns out that's a trend among other babies that I've met within my family. They find it easier to say Dodo rather than Tudor, which I find pretty reasonable. I'm sure that we all used to play video games when we were younger, or maybe still do. It's been a while since I've really had a deep passion for video games. Maybe only recently I've been playing a lot of Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch, but I didn't have a Nintendo Switch for most of the time. In fact, I only got a Nintendo Switch in 2021, which is 4 years after it was originally released. Up until that point, the only way I could play video games was either on my laptop, which usually wasn't that strong, or on my Nintendo Wii. Which brings me to the track console. Stylistically, it's heavily inspired by acts like Massive Attack or DJ Shadow, which have released some absolutely amazing trip-hop albums, specifically Mezzanine and Introducing, which I find to be absolutely hypnotizing in the way they're produced and recorded. Whilst the track doesn't have any lyrics, it more or less is a representation of the importance that video games have had in my life. I used to dream about becoming a game developer. I actually have stacks of papers on which I've drawn characters and all sorts of scenarios that would happen in my video games that I still have to this day. Obviously, this dream has long gone away, but it still remains as a sort of bookmark for that specific era. I'll talk about the next two tracks, Orange and Afternoon, in sort of the same sentence. I'll start with Orange, which was actually the first track that I finished on the album. This one also dates back to about 2022, maybe 2023. I tried creating the sort of warm sound on it, especially for the distorted part. I really wanted to make a warm distortion, so to speak. Did I achieve that? That's up to you to decide. And the sort of warmth brings me to the track Afternoon, which stands in direct contrast to the way the track Orange ends. The theme of this specific track revolves around actually my favorite kind of weather. I know it's very nitpicky, a very specific detail, but I do have a favorite weather. And that is usually around spring, when it's starting to get warm outside, but you still have to wear a hoodie. And specifically when the sun beams onto your face, there's no wind, there's nothing. There's this very warm feeling, especially when you close your eyes, and when you open them again, it's very blue. And so this warm weather that I'm describing really reminds me a lot of Souvlaki by Slowdive, which is one of my favorite albums. And the effect-heavy sound of souvlaki definitely influenced my production style, and also the way this track in specific sounds, especially the second part with this sort of flangey sort of sound, akin to a lot of slow dives, lead guitars. Contrasting again with the previous track, we have the song Pop, which is a noise composition, which is kind of ironic given that the song is called Pop. And I'll tell you one thing, I really enjoy noise and industrial music, specifically power electronics and death industrial. Specifically, I'll mention the track Product of Fear by Ramlich from the Hole in the Heart cassette. This specific cassette is, in my opinion, the best noise album there is, specifically noise. And the track Product of Fear is this very deep and kind of melodic song, but also feels very cold. The sort of feeling that I get from this track is what I imagine the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki heard in their heads when they stared at the barren wasteland that was once their hometown, now turned into complete rubble. It's a very powerful song in my opinion. A few other names I'd like to mention that inspired me to create this song is Lingua Ignota, the album Adaptive Emotional Use by Death Kneel, Distress Signals by Control Bleeding. I'd say that this specific track is directly influenced by all these industrial or power electronics noise, whatever you want to call them. I'll talk about the next two interludes in the same sentence as I did with Orange and Afternoon, given that these two interludes are very similar, both being field recordings. First of all, Trip, given a name, refers to the frequent family trips or vacations I used to have with my family. And usually it was by car. My dad would drive for hours to take us to specific cities around here in Romania and maybe even abroad. And so I got used to the deep hum of the car, specifically when it's driving along a smooth road, which you don't really have in Romania. I'm pretty sure everyone knows that sound, the very calming sound of a speeding car on a highway. And that's what I wanted to sort of highlight with this interlude. Now, Grasshoppers is another field recording that I made, and is actually a lot deeper than you think. Why I added this specific interlude is because of the frequent family functions, so to call them, that I had, especially while I was growing up. My direct family, as in my father, my mother, and my sister, live next door to my grandparents and my aunt, my uncle, and my cousin. And while growing up, me and my cousin would grow to be very close to one another. Usually see him more as a brother to me rather than a cousin, given how much time we've spent together. And during these family functions, which would keep on going late into the night, me and my cousin would just walk around in the darkness that engulfed the entire yard during the night. We would just talk about whatever came up in our mind, sort of carefree. It's a very specific feeling. And all that time, the grasshoppers were chirping away in the background. Okay, moving on. We're entering the last stretch of songs, which I'd call the more mature phase of the album, starting with 2022. Why 2022? Because up until now, rather short time I've spent on this earth, I'd say that 2022 was the best year of my life, so to speak. That's when I felt probably the happiest in general, as in it was a period of discovery for me. That's when my passion for music really flourished. I'd also like to mention that the very big shoegazy riffs aren't necessarily inspired by your usual shoegaze acts. I'd like to bring up a now defunct duo from the 2000s who have quickly become one of my favorite musical acts ever, and that is the Angelic Process. I found out about them in late 2024, and on Radio Music, this duo, which was a couple, are classified as doom gaze, which combines shoegaze with the slow and sludgy rhythms of doom metal. What I like the most about the Angelic Process is how huge, immense and physically heavy, not in a heavy metal sort of sense, no, physically heavy their music sounds. And I'd say that was the main inspiration behind this song sound specifically. Next we have Wind, which is the prelude for what I like to call the two-punch storm of the last two very long songs on the album. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Wind. This track actually came up on a whim when I was coming back from school, and it was very windy outside, very cold. Yet while I was looking out the window, it was sort of majestic, so to speak, the way it was so windy and cold. I immediately tried to transpose what I was feeling within myself into musical form. And what you hear drenched in reverb on this track is actually the original recording I had on my phone of the riff that came up in my mind when I was looking out the window. The recording is completely unaltered, except for the obvious effects and ambience that starts and ends the song. But aside from that, that is stream of conscious in its purest form, so to speak. Alright, so as I was saying, this two-punch storm I've created on this album starts with the lead single for the album, Autumn, for which I also have a music video. Why I released it as a single? Because I thought it was the most palatable song on the album, so to speak, and that would also encompass the themes of the album best. I came up with the riff around early 2024, and originally I thought of it as a very slow track, again moving into slowcore territory. However, I decided to change it based on two major influences, and I'd say the biggest influence for this track in specific is the band ISIS. They're a post-metal act, or atmospheric sludge metal act, both subgenres, who were active in the late 90s and early 2000s, and whom I really enjoy, and specifically the song Beginning and the End, which is my favorite track from them, is what really inspired me in how this song progresses, and the sort of start-stop riffs around the bridge. The other band I'd like to mention is also defunct as of the time of recording. However, I doubt they're going to reunite, and that is actually a local band from my hometown, and their name is Bolters. Their recordings are rather low quality in the way they're produced. However, I'd like to mention one thing that I really enjoyed about their sound, and that is their leads. I really like the way they're composed, sort of minimalist. However, they were still able to sort of convey some pretty strong emotions, in my opinion. And they combine this sort of distortion with the chorus, which I know isn't very groundbreaking. I mean, who hasn't done that? However, their sound specifically really inspired the leads on this track. I was actually their sound guy for most of the concerts they played in my hometown. Some people saw me as a member of the band itself. I never really considered myself part of the band proper, but I was always on the sidelines, Tried my best to cheer them on, try to expose them as much as possible and push them to further evolve their sound, but the band was short-lived, and as of now they're defunct and there's no plans for a future reunion. Right, Dawn, in spite of the fact that it is the second to last track on the album and sort of the peak of the album emotionally, it is in fact the oldest song written on the track. It was actually composed on a piece of paper in like 10 minutes after a while of listening to Godspeed You Black Emperor, which when I first listened to them, specifically F sharp, A sharp, Infinity, in the summer of 2021, blew my mind. I mean, I couldn't comprehend the sounds that I heard. And so in late 2021, when I was still sort of learning how to use FL Studio, I wrote down the structure and the way that the percussion and the riffs would play all across the track, and the structure and melodies on the album, and the structure, melodies and whatever here on the album release is almost identical to the way I wrote it on that piece of paper. I find it quite ironic that the second to last track on the album was actually the oldest track on the album. I never actually thought that it was going to be used in this way, but here we are. And finally, left for, if you read the lyrics to the song, you'll see that I talk about a river. That river actually appears in the music video for Autumn. It's very close to the village in which I live in, on the outskirts of my larger hometown. That was sort of the destination, so to speak, for multiple of the bike rides I used to have with my father. For me personally, it sort of holds a very special place in my heart. I'd say that the imagery of a river also fits the ever-changing nature of time itself, and the themes of moving forward and growing up as a person, which obviously is at the core of the entire album. Of course, for these reasons, I thought it'd be a good fit for the Autumn music video and the message behind it. Given that I'm here, I'm also going to talk about my cover of 1979 by the Smashing Pumpkins. Only as of recently, I actually managed to listen to their full discography. By recently, I mean in the autumn of 2024, and I really enjoy their discography, specifically their 90s period, of course. I'd say Gish is decent, but from Siamese Dream all the way to Machina or Machina or whatever, however you pronounce it, the Machines of God, I think that is a absolutely mind-blowing run of albums, regardless of my opinions. The track 1979. Anyway, the song 1979, the title is the year in which lead vocalist Billy Corgan turned 12, and the lyrics themselves are about sort of childhood itself. It describes the boredom of living in a barren suburbia, so to speak, finding the best way to waste your time. The album it is from, aka Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, is also rather relevant to Epitaph, because it was written as a sort of ode to Billy Corgan's youth, as it was released when he was about 28 or 29 years old, and so he considered that his youth was coming to an end as he would turn 30, and that's when he considered that his young years were ending. And this description also sort of mirrors the way I see Epitaph and describe it as an ode to childhood, sort of goodbye to it, given that I turned 18 at the time of release. Also, the music video is very clearly inspired by the original from the Smashing Pumpkins, at least the parts with Billy Corgan in which he sings very close to the camera. I sat in my dad's car while he was driving around. You know, if you watch the music video, you know what I'm talking about. And that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video and my ramblings, and that's about it. Currently, I'm working on new music under the Dodo project as well as Letter 45. I see them as two separate musical projects who aren't necessarily connected to one another. Maybe I'll have some ideas in the future, but as of now, these are two separate projects. One is dedicated strictly to electronic music. The other is whatever you want to call whatever I made on Epitaph. Anyway, if you want to see more music or to stay up to date, make sure you subscribe to Letter 45. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, the link is in the description. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching, if you've come this far. And feel free to share my album Epitaph with whoever you think is interested. The link to the full album is also in the description. So, yeah. Take care. And I'll see you later. Bye.